How many healthy weeks do you have left to live? Not to survive, not to pay bills, but to truly live. Have you quietly traded away each of your last healthy weeks to buy a sense of security that was never enough? I was like that too, until I left the United States. The first thing I lost was not income. It was the feeling of being chased by time. In Colombia, for the first time in many years, I realized I was no longer measured by productivity, no longer asked whether I was still working, no longer turned into a number in the system. I was allowed to live as a human being, not a bill. But Colombia was only the beginning, because at minute 10, I will tell you why I made a decision many Americans consider reckless, retiring at 59, earlier than planned, earlier than safe, and earlier than fear allows. And what happened after that? Not on paper, but in each day I was still healthy enough to enjoy life. This video is not for everyone. It is for those who are starting to feel that time is more valuable than money, and who are asking themselves, with the same amount of money, am I living or just worrying? 1. Colombia, where I stopped being a bill and became a human being again. There was an evening in the United States when I sat at the kitchen table staring at a piece of paper. Not a travel invitation and not a contract. It was my own spreadsheet. If I kept living that way, with rent, insurance, healthcare, and all the other unnamed expenses, I realized something very cold. I would run out of money before I ran out of life. Not because I was reckless with spending, but because that system was not designed for retirees to breathe. Colombia was not a dream I found in a travel brochure. It was a place I approached with a very American mindset. Try first. Do not bet my whole life. I needed a place that was legal, safe, and most importantly, if it did not work out, I had to be able to leave. Colombia gave me exactly that. A U.S. passport gave me 90 days the moment I arrived, with no complicated questioning. I could extend my stay, or choose a retirement visa if I wanted to stay longer. No one required me to buy property, no one forced me to invest, and no one made me feel like I was asking permission to stay in someone else's country. What lifted the heaviest weight off me was taxes. In the United States, I had grown used to living with constant caution. Would this retirement income be taxed again? Did I unknowingly do something wrong? In Colombia, things were clearer. If I stayed under 183 days per year, I was not considered a tax resident. Retirement income from the United States was not taxed here. Even if I stayed longer, the tax treaty to avoid double taxation meant I did not have to live with vague fear. For the first time in many years, I no longer felt like I was running from a system. But if it were only about visas and taxes, I would not have stayed. What kept me was the feeling that each day passing was not being measured in money. Colombia has more than 500 volunteer programs across the country. Farms, schools, homestays, ecological communities. I was not required to work like a laborer, just 4 to 5 hours a day. In return, I had a place to stay, 1 to 3 meals a day, and something I had lost long ago in the United States, a reason to wake up. I met Jim, 68, from Florida, on a banana farm outside Medellin. In the United States, he used to spend more than $2,500 a month just to survive decently. In Colombia, his personal expenses were under $300. No rent, no food costs, no utility bills. But when I asked what made him stay for nearly a year, Jim did not talk about money. He told me that one afternoon, after finishing the last row of banana trees, a woman from the village hugged him and said thank you. Jim stayed silent for a long time and then said to me, "In the United States, I was used to being noticed only when I was late on a payment. The cost of living here is not something that needs embellishment. A full meal at a local spot costs about $2 to $3. Coffee so good you forget the idea of takeaway costs $1. If you do not volunteer, renting a room in a small town is just over $100 a month. Electricity, water, and internet combined cost less than car insurance in the United States. These numbers do not make you rich, but they make you less afraid. Healthcare is the biggest concern for retirees, and I checked this very carefully. Colombia has a healthcare system that is highly rated in the region. Doctors speak more English than I expected. More importantly, they have time. I am not pushed out of the clinic after 5 minutes. Private insurance is so affordable that I had to reread the contract because I did not believe it. Emergency care works well in major cities, and I no longer feel like I have to choose between my health and a bill. Safety is the question I ask myself every evening when I go out for a walk. Colombia is not perfect, and not every area is safe. But in the places I choose to live, I can walk after dinner without constantly looking over my shoulder. That feeling to me is worth more than many things. I also pay attention to stability. Colombian law is not perfect, but it is consistent enough for foreigners to live long-term. I have the right to buy a home, to legally own property if I choose. I have not done that, but knowing I have the option creates a deep sense of peace. Language used to be a fear. But then I realized Colombians do not mock you when you speak incorrectly. In hospitals, banks, and areas with foreign communities, English is not a major barrier. And every additional Spanish word I learn makes me feel treated more like family. Colombia is not too far from the United States. Flying back to Florida or Texas is not an exhausting trip. The similar time zone allows me to talk to my children and grandchildren without waking up in the middle of the night. I do not feel like I left my old life behind, only that I stepped out of a pace that was wearing me down. The American community here is large enough that you do not feel alone, but not so large that it turns this place into a copy of the United States. The climate, especially in Medellin, is gentle on an aging body. Many people say their joints hurt less and their sleep is deeper. Colombia does not use the dollar, and the peso fluctuates. But the low cost of living makes currency risk no longer a daily obsession. Banking for foreigners is not overly difficult, and I do not feel trapped. Even the thing few people want to think about, if one day I pass away here, the legal system still has clear procedures, and my assets do not fall into an unknown void. And if one day I no longer want to live here, I can leave. Not trapped by a visa. Not bound. No one holds me here through fear. Colombia is not for everyone. But if you are still healthy enough to step outside, still want to feel useful, still want to live as a human being rather than a bill, then this place does not promise you a paradise. It only gives back something many Americans have lost in the process of living the right way: the feeling that you still have value. If what I have shared makes you see your time differently, please like, subscribe to the channel, and save this video for yourself later. Colombia gave me back the feeling of being alive, but it also forced me to make a decision I had delayed for many years. There is one thing I had never thought about before, until I left the United States. Not money, not taxes, but time. When you are young, you measure life in years. When you turn 60, you begin to measure it in summers. And then one day, I heard a number that stopped me cold. Most of us, once we pass this age, have only about 1,000 healthy weeks left, Weeks when we are alert, able to walk, able to think, able to enjoy life. 1,000 weeks sounds like a lot, until you divide it into mornings, trips, meals, conversations. Suddenly it becomes frighteningly fragile. I think back to my friends in the United States, people who are still working, not because they are desperate for money, but because they are afraid. Afraid of retiring too early, afraid of the market collapsing, afraid that one day they will outlive their savings. And I came to realize a truth that is very hard to accept. Most of us do not keep working because we lack money, but because we never feel that we have enough. Even the wealthiest people carry the same fear inside them. That sense of insecurity does not come from a bank account, but from the fact that no one ever taught us what enough means when life is slowly getting shorter. When I was still in the United States, I was like that too. I optimized everything for safety. Retirement accounts, insurance, long-term plans. But I never optimized for health, for time, for the days when I still had enough energy to live fully. And then I realized a bitter paradox. Many people sacrifice the healthiest years of their later life to accumulate more money, only to be afraid to spend that money once they truly retire. Not because they do not need it, but because the fear is still there. Leaving the United States and coming to Colombia made this clear to me. There, I was no longer measured by productivity, no longer asked how much I earned or whether I was still working. I was measured by presence, by the fact that I showed up, was useful, had value to others. And in that slowing down, I realized I had been trading the wrong things for a very long time. If I lose money, I still have many ways to recover. But if I lose health, lose time, then no financial plan can buy those back. I am not looking for countries that help me save every dollar. I am looking for places that help me use my remaining healthy years in the right way. Colombia gave me back the feeling that I am still a human being, not a bill. And the next country I went to taught me a completely different lesson about living slowly, living safely, and living without constantly looking over my shoulder. 2. Panama. I almost went back to the United States after 3 days, and that was the best decision I did not make. I almost returned to the United States after just 3 days in Panama. Not because this place was bad, but because it scared me. Scared me because for the first time in many years, I no longer felt like I was fighting to survive. In the United States, I had grown used to living in a defensive posture. Every morning when I woke up, even before making coffee, my mind was already calculating. How much health insurance would increase this year? If I needed to see a doctor, should I delay it? If something major happened, would my retirement savings hold up? I did not realize how long I had been living this way until I stopped. Panama did not overwhelm me. There was no tropical paradise moment like in the advertisements. On the first day, everything was just normal, too normal. And that was exactly what unsettled me. No one was rushing. No one looked irritated. No one made me feel like I was bothering them just for asking a price or needing help. By the third day, I was sitting alone in the rented house and asking myself what I was doing there. I did not speak Spanish fluently. I was thousands of miles away from my family. I had left a familiar system, expensive and stressful as it was, to step into a place I did not yet understand. I opened my laptop and searched for a flight back to the United States. I truly was ready to go back. Then, right at that moment, an email appeared in my inbox from my health insurance company in the United States. A notice of the new premium for next year. Not a major shock, just a reasonably increased number. But it was that reasonableness that made me stand up, step out onto the balcony, and look down at the quiet street below. I suddenly realized how conditioned I had become. Conditioned to paying more every year to receive less. Conditioned to fearing illness, not because of pain, but because of the bill that follows. Conditioned to treating anxiety as the normal state of aging. The next morning, I tried calling a private clinic in Panama. I did not use insurance. I simply asked for the price. When they answered, I stayed silent for a few seconds. Not because I did not believe them, but because I could not remember the last time I had heard a price that did not make my chest tighten. In that moment, I realized the problem was not whether Panama was good or not. It was that I had accepted a stressful life in the United States for so long that when the pressure was released, I felt uneasy. In the days that followed, I began to see everything differently. I went to the market and bought fresh fish for a price that in the United States would barely cover bottled water. The vendor asked where I was from, not to judge, but to talk. No one asked what I used to do for a living. No one asked what kind of insurance I had. Here, I was not a file. I was a human being. As I looked more closely into staying in Panama long-term, the contrast became even clearer. After a lifetime of being used to paperwork, deadlines, and renewals, I could hardly believe that having a stable pension was enough. No investment required, no proof of assets, no race against time. For the first time, the system was not pushing me away, but opening the door for me to step in. Taxes, the word that used to keep me tense every year, are no longer an obsession here. Retirement income from the United States, Social Security, the money I worked my entire life to earn, is not taken again in this place. I am not richer, but I am no longer being worn down year after year, and that, for a retiree, is worth far more. I began to sleep more deeply. It may sound small, but for me it was the clearest sign. In the United States, even while sleeping, my mind was preparing for the next risk. Here, I sleep without being on guard. One afternoon, I met an American who had lived in Panama for nearly 10 years. He looked at me and said, "Panama did not give me more money. It just did not take away my peace." I laughed at the time, but that sentence stayed with me for a long while. I do not live luxuriously. I live just enough. But that sense of enough was exactly what I had lost in the United States. I do not have to delay seeing a doctor. I do not have to weigh every small decision out of fear of financial consequences. I no longer feel like I am fighting against time. Panama is not perfect, but it does not demand that I be strong when I am already tired. It does not make me feel like a burden. And most importantly, it gives me the right to grow old without fear. If one day I want to return to the United States, I can. No door is closed behind me, but the longer I stay here, the more I understand that the reason I remain is not because Panama holds me, but because I no longer want to return to a life where everything is a battle. And if you are still watching at this point, perhaps you are in a similar stage to where I once was. You are not failing. You are just tired. You do not need more money. You need a place where your money is not drained along with your health. So the real question is not whether you have enough money to retire. It is this: with the same amount of money, do you choose to live in worry, or to live more lightly somewhere else? 3. Portugal. Where Americans can grow old without fear, I used to think the scariest thing about old age was running out of money. But then I realized that something even more frightening is not knowing whether you still have a place in the world. I carried that worry with me when I set foot in Portugal. Not the worry of a tourist, but the worry of a retired American, used to living inside a tightly regulated system, used to everything needing to be clearly written on paper. I was not looking for a paradise. I just needed to know. If I stayed here, would I be legal? Would I be stuck? And if things did not work out, could I go back? Visas were the first question, and also the most important one. Without a visa, every conversation about safety, healthcare, or cost of living is just fantasy. What surprised me was that Portugal did not ask me to prove how exceptional I was. They did not require large investments, did not ask me to create jobs, did not force me to buy property. They simply asked, "Do you have enough to live on?" That question, for a retired American, felt more like a gentle nod than an exam. But Americans never stop at visas. Taxes come next. I have lived long enough to know that taxes are not just numbers, but a feeling of being watched for life. In the United States, you can move states, change careers, even change your entire life, but taxes never leave you. What I needed in Portugal was not to avoid taxes, but to know where I stood. And it was that clarity that created relief. When income from the United States was not taxed on top of itself in the early years, I did not feel like I was bending the rules. I felt like I was living within them. Cost of living is something many videos exaggerate. I did not believe it until I lived here long enough. Not because it is unbelievably cheap, but because it does not make you flinch every month. In the United States, I was used to opening bills in a defensive state of mind. Here, expenses become so steady that you forget that sense of anxiety ever existed. And when your mind is no longer occupied by money, you begin to think about other things, like health, like time, like yourself. Healthcare is the real fear. Not the fear of being sick, but the fear of not daring to be sick. I used to hesitate to see a doctor in the United States because I did not know how far the bill would take me. In Portugal, for the first time, I realized I could see a doctor without mentally preparing for a financial shock. Doctors are not rushed. They do not look at me like a case that needs to be processed quickly. They talk. And for older people, being listened to is sometimes more important than the prescription. Personal safety is something I did not realize I was missing until it appeared. I walk in the evening without tension, not gripping my bag, not constantly scanning my surroundings. In the United States, I had lived in that state for so long that I considered it normal. Portugal does not put me on guard, and that is what made me realize how tired I had become. I also used to worry, what if the laws change? Americans carry a quiet obsession with instability. Portugal is not perfect, but they change slowly. And for someone who has nearly finished a lifetime of work, that slowness is a gift. It gives you time to think, time to adjust, time to step back if needed. Language used to be my biggest fear. I was not afraid of learning. I was afraid of being helpless when I needed help. But here, I realized I was not alone. In hospitals, banks, and basic services, English is enough to keep you from panicking. And when you are not panicking, you learn faster and adapt better. What I did not expect was the community. Not a loud community, but people like me. Retired Americans who were once afraid, who once planned an exit strategy, knowing that if something happens, there are people who understand you, speak the same language, and have walked this path before you. That creates a very deep sense of security. And finally, there is the thing I always keep in mind, even if I do not say it out loud. What if I do not like it? I need to know that I am not trapped, that I can return to the United States without losing anything. Only when there is an exit do I truly dare to stay. And the paradox is this: precisely because there is a way back, I no longer want to use it. Portugal does not make me richer. It does not promise a glamorous life. But it gives me something I no longer had in the United States. The feeling that my old age is not a burden, not a risk, and not a race against bills. If these are my last 10 healthy years, I do not want to live them in tension. And for the first time in many years, I feel like I no longer have to be on guard against life. I did not make this video to tell you to leave the United States. I only want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself, are your remaining healthy weeks being used to live, or only to worry? Money can be earned again. Plans can be adjusted. But time never comes back. If somewhere in the world gives you a chance to live more slowly, more safely, and with a lighter heart, perhaps the important question is not whether you dare to go, but whether you dare to face this question sooner rather than later.